For years I sat quietly, listening to the same line over and over again. No money for you. Those words felt colder each time, like a door closing slowly while I stood outside. But last week, I held a set of new keys in my hand and pressed them gently against a red door that belongs to me now. The same people who once had nothing to give suddenly had everything to say. Their calls haven't stopped since that photo went out, but my hands aren't shaking anymore, and I'm not standing outside any door. I built my own. Thank you for taking a little of your time to be here with me today. It truly means more than you know. And before I go any further, I would love for you to tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because I enjoy reading those messages and knowing how far my words travel. My name is Edna, and I live in Iowa, a quiet place where mornings still feel gentle and honest. I have lived here for most of my life, building a simple home and working hard every single day, not because life gave me much, but because I believed in making something steady out of whatever I had. I am not someone who likes noise or arguments. I've always been the kind of woman who carries her pain quietly and gives her love freely, even when it's not returned the way it should be. I raised a family with hope in my heart, believing that kindness always finds its way back, even if it takes years. But sometimes, the people we love the most grow comfortable with the idea that we will always be there waiting with open hands, even when those hands are empty and tired. For so long, I accepted silence as a way to keep the peace, but silence has a weight of its own, and mine grew heavier with every promise that never came. I watched as others found their joy and comfort, and I told myself that my turn would come one day. What I didn't know then was that my quiet waiting was teaching me something far stronger than begging ever could. It was teaching me how to stand on my own, how to let their laughter echo without needing to be a part of it, and how to build a life where my worth wasn't determined by someone else's spare change. So when I finally held those keys, it wasn't just a house I was claiming. It was my voice, my strength, and the part of me I refused to let them take away. I was born and raised here in Iowa, in a small town where everyone seemed to know each other's names. And for a long time, I thought that kind of closeness would always protect me from feeling truly alone. Life had never been fancy for me, but it was honest. I spent most of my younger years working at a small diner on Main Street, pouring coffee, listening to people talk about their lives, and saving every single dollar I could. I didn't have much, but what I did have, I gave freely to my family. I believed that love wasn't measured in big gestures, but in quiet sacrifices no one else saw. I remember those long winter mornings when the cold would bite at my fingers as I waited for the first bus, heading to work before the sun even rose. I did it with a steady heart, because I wanted to make sure there was food on the table, that the lights stayed on, and that my child never felt the kind of emptiness I once knew. As the years passed, I grew older, slower, but my heart remained the same. I watched the world change around me, watched my child grow, watched the family I had built take shape, and for a while, I believed everything was all right. I never asked for anything grand in return. I never expected diamonds, trips, or gifts. All I ever wanted was a little kindness, a little understanding, maybe a ride to the store when my legs got too tired, or a small hand with a bill when the month felt too long. I told myself these were small things, the kind of things families do without thinking twice. But over time, I started to notice how different my needs were treated compared to theirs. I watched vacations get planned like clockwork, designer bags stacked neatly in closets, cars rolling into their driveway that I could never afford in my lifetime. And while they lived louder and brighter, my world stayed quiet and small. I clipped coupons every week and rode the same bus that rattled through town, never complaining, never raising my voice. I told myself that asking was already hard enough, so when the answers came back cold and firm, I learned to shrink a little more each time. Every no cut a little deeper than the last, and I carried those cuts silently. I told myself it was fine, that family meant understanding even when it wasn't spoken, that they'd see one day, they'd notice the weight I carried and step in. But the truth was, they had noticed. They just didn't care enough to lift the load. I became the quiet background to their celebrations, the person they saw as fine because I never shouted, Never pushed back, never demanded. That kind of silence turns into something else after a while. It hardens, it builds walls, and behind those walls I learned to keep my heart safe from expecting too much. Even then, I kept doing what I always did. I kept baking pies during the holidays, even when I wasn't invited to the table. I kept sending birthday cards with what little I could spare, even when mine came late or not at all. I kept being steady, because that's what love looked like to me. And I didn't know how to be any other way. But life has a way of teaching lessons in silence, and mine was showing me that love without respect isn't love at all. It's dependency wrapped in guilt. So I began to hold my breath a little less, and my head a little higher. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't shout it to the world. I just started to keep pieces of myself for me, little bits of strength I didn't have to give away anymore. I didn't know it then, but that quiet shift would change everything. I remember the first time I asked for help so clearly that it still plays in my mind like a film I can't pause. It was a quiet evening. The kind where the sun drops slowly behind the trees and the house feels too still. My grocery list sat on the table, smaller than it used to be, with more crossed-out items than ones I could afford to keep. My knees had been aching that week, and I thought maybe, just maybe, if I asked kindly, my child might offer to help me with a little money for the groceries. Nothing grand, nothing too much. Just enough to ease a bit of the weight. So I picked up the phone, took a deep breath, and told myself it would be all right. When the line connected, I spoke softly, carefully, hoping that the love I had given all these years would find its way back to me, even in the smallest form. But instead of warmth, what came back was cold and quick, like a door slammed without warning. I heard those words for the first time, and they cut deeper than I expected. There's just no extra money right now. I stood there with the phone pressed against my ear, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. It was like my heart had reached out and found nothing on the other side. I whispered that it was fine, hung up, and stared at the list on the table as the room fell into a silence, so heavy it almost hummed. The next day, while walking to the store with my aching knees and counting every coin in my purse, I saw the photos. They were posted for everyone to see, bright and smiling, full of expensive dinners and another weekend away. I stared at those pictures and tried to swallow the ache that grew in my chest. I had asked for something so small, but the answer I got made me feel invisible. That moment wasn't about the groceries anymore. It was about the crack it created inside me. I began to notice everything after that. I noticed how my requests always seemed to arrive on the wrong day, how every ask became a burden they claimed they couldn't carry, yet their lives never slowed down. New shoes, new outfits, new vacations, everything around them screamed abundance, while I learned to fold my hopes into the corners of my kitchen table where no one could see them. I watched the gap between their world and mine grow wider. And every time I asked, it felt like I was stepping closer to a cliff they didn't care to build a bridge over. But I didn't let them see me break. I thanked them for nothing. I smiled even when the weight in my chest ached. I walked to the store alone. I learned to live on less and less, telling myself that I could handle it. And in a way I did, but not without feeling the sting of knowing they had more than enough. They just didn't have enough for me. That first no planted a seed of quiet hurt inside me. And with each passing year, that seed grew into something steady. Something unspoken. It's strange how a single sentence can settle so deep in your bones. But it did. It stayed with me through every bus ride in the rain, every grocery line where I counted coins twice, every night I turned off the light early to save a little more. And even though I didn't say it out loud, a small part of me changed that day. A part of me began to understand that love without action is just a sound that fades when the phone clicks off. That first no didn't stay alone. It returned over and over again, each time dressed a little colder, each time cutting a little deeper. It became almost like a script I could recite before the words even left their mouth. Whenever I needed a little help with something, whether it was groceries, a medical bill, or even a ride when my legs were too tired to walk, the answer was always the same. There's just no extra money right now. They would say it with the same calm voice, as if I was asking for something outrageous, as if it was too much to offer even a hand when I had spent my life offering both of mine. I stopped being surprised after a while, but I never stopped feeling it. Every no built another quiet wall inside me, brick by brick, until it felt like I was on one side of life and they were on the other. I would sit alone sometimes, holding those little bills in my hand, the ones that seemed to get heavier with each passing month, and I'd remind myself of all the years I had worked, saved, given, and sacrificed, so they would never feel the kind of weight I now carried. I told myself that maybe they were struggling, that maybe life had just gotten harder, but then I'd see the proof with my own eyes. It wasn't hidden. It was right there, flashing on screens, paraded through their smiles, showing me just how far I sat from their world. There were new cars, shiny and loud, the kind I could only admire from a distance. There were handbags that cost more than what I spent in 3 months, vacations by the water, fine dinners with candles and laughter that didn't seem to run short. And I would think about the way my life looked beside theirs, the way I carried bags of groceries up the hills slowly, the way I turned the lights off early to save on the bill, the way I counted coins with my hands shaking a little, not from weakness, but from the weight of knowing I was alone in this. I tried to tell myself that maybe one day they'd notice, maybe one day they'd feel a tug at their heart and step in without me having to ask again. But that day never came. Instead, their lives grew louder and mine quieter. Holidays were the hardest. I would bring small gifts, homemade pies, and warm hugs, but every celebration became another reminder of how little I was valued. I'd watch them laugh in rooms I felt like a guest in, not family, just someone passing through. They would exchange expensive presents, wrap their arms around each other, and I'd stand off to the side with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. When the night was over, I'd walk home in the cold, holding the same empty bag I came with, and tell myself I was fine. But the truth is, it stung every single time. People say words don't cost anything, but I've learned that they can cost everything. No money for you became more than just a sentence. It became the sound of doors closing, the echo of distance growing, and the slow fading of hope that they might ever treat me with the same care I once gave them. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just grew quieter. Because sometimes silence is the only way to keep your dignity when love becomes one-sided. And even though they didn't hear it, inside me something was shifting. I stopped expecting softness from a place that had only grown cold, and instead, I began to build something small and quiet for myself. Something no one could take from me. It didn't look like strength yet, but it was starting to feel like it. As time went on, I learned to stop asking altogether, because hearing the same answer over and over began to hurt more than the struggle itself. I kept my thoughts to myself, and I handled things quietly, the way I always had. But one evening, when the cold crept into my bones and my bills sat unopened on the table, I felt something different stir inside me. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't sadness. It was resolve. I realized I couldn't keep waiting for care that would never come. I had spent too many years giving everything I had, and now it was time to keep something for myself. That was the night I began to plan, even if I didn't yet know what that plan would become. Days later, while I was at the small local market, I ran into an old friend I hadn't seen in years. Her face lit up when she saw me, and she asked how I'd been. At first, I gave the usual answer, that I was fine, just keeping busy, but something in her eyes told me I didn't need to pretend. We sat for a while over coffee, and as we talked, I felt a kind of warmth I hadn't felt in so long. The kind that doesn't come from pity, but from genuine care. She told me about her own struggles, about how she had started over after her husband passed, and how she found peace in doing things for herself again. Her words lingered with me long after we said goodbye. That conversation planted a quiet seed of courage in me. I started to look at my life differently, at what I had left instead of what I'd lost. I still had my health, my small savings, and memories of those who once believed in me. I thought about my late brother, how he used to tell me that someday I'd have to stop carrying everyone else and let myself breathe. For the first time, I began to understand what he meant. I didn't need to be rescued. I just needed to remember that I was capable of more than surviving. I could still choose what came next, and that realization changed everything. After that day, something inside me started to move in a way it hadn't in years. It was quiet and steady, like a small flame catching hold in the dark. I went home and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had spent so many nights feeling invisible, and this time, I didn't feel powerless. I pulled out a small box where I kept all my old papers, things I had held onto for no real reason other than habit. But that night, I looked at them differently. I sorted through every envelope, every receipt, every folded note like a woman who was finally ready to take back her own life. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for help to arrive. I was quietly preparing to help myself. I started by making a list, not of what I lacked, but of what I still had. A little savings tucked away, a few personal belongings worth something, my determination, and the memory of promises made long ago. I remembered the letter my brother left behind, the one I never opened fully, because at the time I didn't want to face the idea of needing it. That night, with trembling hands and a heart that felt both heavy and strong, I finally unfolded it. His handwriting was careful, like he had written it knowing it would matter. In it, he reminded me that love isn't proven by what people say, but by what they leave behind when they're gone. He had set something aside for me, something quiet, something meant to give me the chance to stand on my own if the world ever turned cold. The next morning, I dressed with more purpose than I had in a long time and went to the small law office downtown. I sat across from the attorney who had known my brother for years, and when he pulled out those papers and explained everything to me, my hands shook so badly I had to hold them together. My brother had made sure I would have enough to start over, enough to build a life where I didn't have to keep asking and waiting for people who had already turned away. Walking out of that office, the cold air didn't bite as sharply as it usually did. I felt a kind of calm settle over me, the kind that doesn't come from luck, but from finally standing on your own 2 feet. I didn't tell anyone what I had found. I kept it to myself, holding it close like a secret that belonged only to me. Every step after that felt different. When I went to the store, I no longer counted my coins with dread. When the phone rang with more empty excuses, I didn't let it break me. I had a plan now, one they didn't know about. And that quiet plan gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. It gave me strength. In the weeks that followed, I carried that secret like a soft ember tucked close to my heart, warming me in a way their coldness never could. I moved carefully, quietly, making decisions that belonged to me alone, and it felt unfamiliar at first, almost like learning to walk again after standing still for too long. Each time the phone rang with their voices on the other end, each time they brushed me aside or spoke as if I was an afterthought, I no longer felt that sting of helplessness. Instead, I felt a growing calm because I knew something they didn't. I knew their no was no longer the end of my road. One evening, they called asking for a favor, as if nothing had ever happened, as if their constant refusals had never existed. They wanted something from me again, and though their words were polite, I could hear the carelessness underneath. It was the same tone I had heard for years, the one that made my heart feel small. But this time, I didn't rush to comfort or to agree. I simply said that, but this time, I didn't rush to comfort or to agree. I simply said that I couldn't, and that was it. I didn't explain, I didn't apologize, I didn't bend. The silence on the other end of the line said more than their words ever did. It was in that moment that I realized how much power I had slowly given away over the years by trying to keep the peace. I thought being quiet was strength, but what I was doing back then was shrinking myself so they wouldn't feel the weight of my needs. I was never asking for too much, I was just asking the wrong people. Now with my brother's gift and the little I had worked so hard to keep, I didn't have to ask anymore. I could choose, I could decide. And that quiet kind of strength felt better than any handout ever could. I remember hanging up that night and sitting in my chair by the window, watching the town lights flicker in the distance. It felt like I was seeing my life from the outside. And for once, I didn't see someone desperate to be included. I saw a woman who had waited long enough, a woman who had finally drawn her line and decided that her worth wasn't something they could measure. It was mine. That moment wasn't loud, but it was the beginning of everything that would follow. It was the turning point. The moment when I stopped being the one waiting on the outside of their world and started building my own. It was quiet, but it was steady, like a door opening to a place I had never allowed myself to step into before. From that day forward, I stopped holding my breath waiting for them to notice me. I stopped expecting them to change. Instead, I focused on the pieces of my life that were still mine to shape, and I held them carefully, like something worth protecting. That shift didn't make the hurt disappear, but it made me stronger than the hurt. The day I signed those papers is a day I will never forget, not because there were crowds or celebrations, but because it was quiet and mine. I walked into that small office with my heart beating slowly but firmly, carrying a strength I had earned over many years of being overlooked. The attorney laid out the documents carefully, explaining everything, but my mind was already standing in front of that red door, imagining the sound of the key turning for the first time. When I picked up the pen, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from a deep kind of relief that only comes when you finally step into the life you deserve. It was a signature, just a few lines of ink on paper, but to me it felt like reclaiming every piece of myself I had quietly tucked away for too long. As I walked outside afterward, the wind touched my face gently, and for once it didn't feel cold. It felt like something was opening. I took the bus to the house, the same bus I had ridden so many times over the years while dreaming of something better. Only this time, I wasn't going home to sit in the dark. I was going to a place that belonged to me. When I stepped off at the stop and walked down that quiet street, I saw it. A simple house by the lake. Nothing too grand, but everything about it felt right. The soft color of the walls, the red door glowing in the sunlight, the still water stretching out behind it like a promise. I stood there for a moment, not moving, letting the air wrap around me, as if the world itself had been waiting for me to arrive. When I turned the key in the lock for the first time, the sound of it clicking open made something inside me unclench. I walked through the empty room slowly, touching the walls, running my hands across the window frames, breathing in the faint smell of fresh paint and new beginnings. I didn't need anyone to walk beside me. I didn't need anyone to say they were proud. This was my moment, born from years of silence, years of being told no, years of being invisible. It was my yes, given to myself. I placed the small photo of my brother on the kitchen counter, right by the window where the light poured in. I whispered a quiet thank you, because I knew he had believed in me even when others didn't. It wasn't just a house. It was a piece of my dignity returned, a piece of my heart, finally resting where it belonged. Standing there, I felt a calm that I hadn't felt in so many years, a calm that didn't depend on anyone else's permission. It was the sound of my own life opening up, and this time, I was the one holding the key. I remember standing outside that house, holding the keys against the red door and letting the sunlight touch my face, and for the first time in so long, I didn't feel small. I felt free. I had no speech prepared, no announcement planned, just a simple photo that spoke louder than any explanation ever could. I lifted my hand slowly, pressed the keys against the wood, and took the picture. No words, no caption, just that one image. It wasn't about showing off. It was about claiming what was mine after years of standing in the shadows of their excuses. A house paid for in full, not by their kindness, but by quiet endurance and a promise that had waited patiently for me to be ready. When I sent that photo to the family group chat, I didn't expect silence to be so loud. At first, nothing came through, just the little sign showing it had been seen. Then the messages started to pour in one after another, so fast I could barely keep up with the screen lighting up in my hand. Whose house is this? How did you get this? Mom, where are you? Are you serious? Their shock filled the space I had spent years waiting to be noticed in. My daughter-in-law sent long strings of question marks, as if I owed them every detail, as if they had the right to know how I had built something without them. And then came the calls. First one, then another, then more, until the sound became a steady chorus I refused to answer. I placed the phone on the counter, still buzzing, and walked through my house slowly, letting my footsteps echo through rooms that finally belonged to me. Every unanswered ring reminded me of all the times my own calls for help had been met with silence. All those years they couldn't find a way to help me, and now they couldn't stop calling. That difference sank deep into me, not as bitterness, but as truth. I didn't owe them an explanation. I didn't owe them the joy I had fought for in quiet. I leaned against the doorway, closed my eyes, and listened to the sound of their urgency colliding with the calm I had built for myself. When I opened my eyes, the house felt even warmer, like the walls themselves understood what this moment meant. I didn't need to say anything. They had spoken loud enough through their years of absence. My silence now wasn't revenge. It was peace. And for the first time, it belonged to me entirely. The calls kept coming for days, first with confusion, then with demands, and finally with voices that carried a kind of panic I had never heard from them before. All those years when I asked for a little help and was told there was nothing to spare, they were calm and collected. But now when they saw I had something that didn't involve them, their tone changed, as if the world had shifted without their permission. I let the phone ring each time, not out of cruelty, but because I had learned the hard way that not every call deserves an answer. I had spent so many years bending, waiting, hoping they would one day see me. This time, it was their turn to wait. But one evening, I decided to pick up, not because they deserved an explanation, but because I was no longer afraid of their words. I sat down at my kitchen table, the one that faced the lake, where the air was still and clear. When I answered, my child's voice came through fast and heavy, filled with questions. Who bought the house? How did you get the money? Why didn't you tell us? Each question came sharp, as if I had committed a crime by building something for myself. I listened quietly, letting every word slide past me. And when the noise finally softened, I spoke with the calm they could never take from me. I told them the house was mine, fully paid for, and that they didn't need to worry about how it happened. I said I had been taken care of in a way they never cared to ask about, and that this time, I owed no one a single explanation. They tried to twist it then, their words turning from questions to invitations, saying how nice it would be to spend weekends there, how wonderful it would be to make new memories together by the lake. It was almost strange to hear so much warmth from the same mouths that once turned away when I needed them. For a moment, I let their words hang in the air, not to hurt them, but to remind myself that kindness doesn't have to mean forgetting. I told them I would decide what happened in my house and on my terms, and that respect would come before visits or plans. There was a silence after that, the kind that isn't peaceful. The kind that shows when people finally understand they've lost the control they thought they had. I ended the call gently, without anger, and sat in that same chair a little longer. The night outside was quiet, and the lake shimmered in the moonlight. It felt different now, not like a place I had escaped to, but like a home I had claimed. Their voices no longer had the power to shake me. Their disappointment wasn't mine to carry, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for choosing myself. That night, after the last call had faded into silence, I sat alone with a feeling that I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't bitterness. It was peace. A deep, quiet kind of peace that came from finally standing in my own space without having to ask anyone for permission. For so many years, I had believed that love meant accepting less, waiting patiently, and hoping they would care enough to see me. But sitting there in my own kitchen, in my own house, I finally understood that love without respect isn't love at all. All those no money for you years had left scars that didn't show on my skin, but they lived inside me. And for the first time, those scars didn't feel like a burden anymore. They felt like proof that I had survived everything they thought would break me. I thought about every long night I had spent sitting in the dark, counting coins, waiting for kindness that never came. I thought about every cold walk in the rain, every birthday where I smiled through being forgotten, every holiday where I showed up with a warm heart and left with empty hands. I thought about the way I had swallowed their indifference, made excuses for their silence, and still held on to the hope that one day they'd treat me with the same care I had shown them. And yet, here I was, standing in everything they said I would never have, not because they gave it to me, but because I found it on my own. That realization settled into me like the softest kind of strength. The house was still and quiet. Outside, the wind brushed against the lake, and the sound was steady, like a heartbeat reminding me that this was my life now. I didn't have to fight to be heard anymore. I didn't have to beg to be seen. I didn't have to explain how I got here or prove that I deserved it. Their absence had taught me what their love never did. I had learned to be my own anchor, to trust the silence instead of fearing it. And in that silence, I found something stronger than their approval. I found myself. I leaned back in my chair and let the weight of everything I'd carried for years slowly ease from my shoulders. I had no interest in revenge or proving a point. I didn't need their apologies to feel whole. All I needed was this moment, this house, this stillness that belonged to no one else but me. The life I had built without their help had become the answer to every excuse they had ever given. And as the night deepened, I knew with every steady breath that I would never again shrink myself just to make room for people who had already shown me how little space they were willing to give. The days after that were quiet in a way I had never known before, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that hurt. It was gentle, steady, and calm, like finally exhaling after holding your breath for too long. For so many years, my worth was measured through the eyes of people who never truly saw me. But now I no longer needed their approval to feel whole. I woke up each morning in a home that carried no trace of their neglect, only the echo of my own footsteps and the sound of the wind brushing softly against the lake. That sound reminded me that I had walked through years of silence and came out standing on solid ground. I had spent a lifetime giving without expecting anything back, but I finally learned the quiet power of choosing myself. Not with loud announcements, not with revenge, just with one simple truth. I didn't need to beg for a seat at a table I helped build. I built my own. And in that, I found the kind of strength no one could take from me. When the calls came, I no longer trembled. When the messages filled with questions arrived, I no longer felt that ache of needing to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. And that was enough. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of my story. It means more than I can ever put into words. If this story spoke to you even a little, I would love to know where you're watching from. And I hope you share your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already, please subscribe so you can be here with me again next time.